Before we talk about living longer, we need to talk about living better. The longevity industry is booming, but much of what's being sold isn't just science, it's hype. Pills, peptides, biohacks, and expensive lab tests dominate the conversation, while the deeper, more transformative elements of healthy aging are often ignored. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, an exercise physiologist with a passion for making science simple and life better as we age, with my co-host, Corbin Bruton. Today, we're kicking off Season 5 by asking a bold question. What are the so-called longevity experts getting wrong? We'll talk about why supplements and biohacks are not the foundation of healthy aging, why the spiritual and social dimensions of wellness are critical, and why our 6 pillars are more powerful than any quick fix. We'll also explore what I call transformational aging, a model that looks beyond performance towards purpose and formation. This is an episode about getting back to what truly matters, aging well. The Aging Well podcast encourages informed decision-making and always consult your physician and scientific literature when making decisions about your health.
Dr. Armstrong, here we are, Season 5 of the Aging Well podcast. The longevity space has exploded. Podcasts, supplements, tech, you name it. From your perspective, what's driving this surge of interest?
It's been something I've been thinking about is, why are people so interested? Because we're living in a society that is highly inactive. I mean, I think it's almost 74% of the U.S. population isn't meeting the minimum effective guidelines for physical activity. And so why are so many people interested in, supplements and, the trackers? I mean, what are people tracking if they're not physically active? All those people that are buying these Fitbits and these different trackers, what are they actually tracking if they're not physically active? And so I think a lot of it is people want to be healthy. They want to be active. And so they're oftentimes trying to find the quickest avenue to better health and to, better longevity. And this whole notion of longevity has exploded because I think we're seeing a lot more of these people in the media that are promoting it. You have the Brian Johnsons out there, you have the Andrew Hubermans, the, Peter Attias, and, so many others that are promoting, longevity. You got to live longer. And this idea we could live longer if we just take the right supplement or we do the right kind of workout or whatever it is. And, we are not the only Aging Well podcast, but in my humble opinion, we are the Aging Well podcast because we're hopefully expanding beyond that longevity space. And we're looking at really the transformational space in which, we can age with purpose, with intention and vitality.
To answer your question about, what are they actually tracking? Do you think they're just tracking the illusion of being healthy? Like, oh, I'm drinking Diet Coke versus regular Coke, so I'm healthier. But you're still drinking a Coke, regardless. It's not healthy.
Well, I don't know if any of those trackers actually track, your diet versus sugared pop and stuff like that, but I think there is that effort to, we talk about baby steps. So I think maybe people are looking at, okay, I can track my baby steps and the changes that I might be making. And so, I don't know if people actually think they're healthy or they just have the intent of trying to be healthier, which either way, it's a good thing. We just need to get people the right education as to what is it that is going to get them healthier? If they're tracking, are they tracking the right stuff and are they tracking it for the right purposes?
Good answer.
If you're enjoying the Aging Well podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your favorite platform so you will never miss an episode. And if you find our conversations helpful, please share the podcast with a friend, because aging is something we're all doing and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below, and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. Thank you, and now back to the podcast.
Well, a lot of the public messaging around longevity seems to be the center on biohacking and supplements. So, what are the biggest problems with that approach?
Well, as we've mentioned probably numerous times on this podcast, I really do not like the word biohacking. I look at it as being shortcuts. And I have talked to some, people in the medical profession that somewhat use the phrase biohack, and there's a certain purposeful side to it. But then there's also that, you can just kind of buy in all the grifters on YouTube and on, social media that are peddling a bunch of garbage out there and, telling you that, this biohack's going to get you healthier, or this supplement's going to get you longer life, or, counteract all of the poor lifestyle choices that you've made. And the biggest problem with the notion of biohacking from a standpoint of in supplements of trying to correct our poor health is that they're not addressing the root problems of our health. And, if we want to live longer, we want to age well, we have to be making choices that are going to support the body's natural processes that are going to keep it living longer. And biohacking, if you want to use that phrase correctly, I think we should probably push toward maybe changing that from biohacking to biooptimization.
Ooh,
I think might be a little bit better use of the word, because in that case, when we're talking about optimization, is we're doing everything that we can to push the needle toward our best selves. And sometimes just because of the environment that we live in, the foods that are available to us, our lifestyle and all those things, we can't quite get to where we need to be. And we might need just something else to just kind of polish things off a little bit and make it a little bit better. And I really loved Dr. Nayan Patel's analogy of the seesaw when he was talking about glutathione, and how our goal is to try and bring our life into balance. And oftentimes when we're using something like a biohack or a supplement, it pushes us, because we're only focused on one particular area, that seesaw tilts down to one particular side, and then that other side becomes out of balance. Now we have to do something else to bring it back up into balance. And so when we live a lifestyle that is focused on balance overall, then we get that seesaw into a little bit better balance, and then we can refine it a little bit with a bit more of a biooptimization or certain supplements that might be lacking based on our physiology or our lifestyle and those types of things. Because nobody's going to be perfect when it comes to this aging well. We're around that asymptote that we talk about. We're balancing ourselves, trying to bring ourselves to the best selves that we can be.
No, I think you should coin that phrase. Live here on the Aging Well podcast, we coined the phrase biooptimizing. I love it. Oh, it's so good.
I'm sure we're not the first people to probably say that, but I want to emphasize it as much more. When we talk about these things, I think biooptimization should be the phrasing that we should be stressing to people.
Well, that kind of segues into our next question, which is, why do you think people are so drawn to quick fixes rather than sustainable, evidence-based lifestyle changes?
Well, it's human nature. I think we're naturally lazy. We don't want to put the work in. We want the easy fixes. And I think we're also just so bombarded, from social media and the internet and, a lot of the misinformation that's out there, that these biohacks, these quick fixes are going to get us to where we need to be. And, I think a lot of people are just drinking the Kool-Aid. How many people, or how often are you hearing GLP-1 in the media? It's like, good grief, people, just get off your ass and start doing some exercise and eating right. And a lot of this wouldn't be the issue. Now, certainly there are issues where people can use those drugs to their benefit. But when we are relying on pharmacology and drugs or treatments to get us well, that's not aging well. That's just trying to fix what we've broken instead of trying to not break it in the first place. And so rather than and I think a lot of it is too, our healthcare system is so formed on fixing problems rather than preventing problems, that it just becomes a natural, we're focused on fixing rather than not breaking in the first place.
Right. And we can do a whole podcast episode on that, and I know we have in the past. But you're bringing up a really good point. Is our big pharma is so focused on just putting a band-aid over it versus coming up with an actual solution, and the actual solution is a healthy lifestyle, right? It's part
Right.
of aging well. And yeah, we could go on and on about that, but there's not enough time in this episode. But Dr. Armstrong, now you often talk about the SPIES model: spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social wellness. How does this model challenge the narrow view of longevity that's being pushed by many of our experts online?
Well, I think the emphasis on longevity is purely on the duration of time that we live. So we have this push to try and hit 120, or Brian Johnson trying to live 140, and we aren't focused as much on the quality of life. And so when we focus purely on the physical, and we've talked often about the idea of aging well, exercise science, medicine being biomechanical, psychosocial, not just biological. We're so focused on the biological aspects of aging that we neglect the spiritual and the intellectual and the emotional and even the social pieces of it. And as this podcast has evolved over the last 4 years, we're now into season 5. We kind of started off with a little bit more of a physical approach to it, both being exercise scientists. And we focused on exercise, diet, body composition, and not smoking. But it didn't take us long, with the number of guests that we were interviewing, to realize that we were missing out on talking about sleep and talking particularly about the role of purposeful social connections in aging. And when we look at, and it's amazing that we don't hear about it as much, but we talk about longevity and we talk about the blue zones, but we never hear anybody in that longevity space talking about, well, gee, none of these people in these blue zones ever talk about their biohacks or their longevity protocols. But one of the biggest and most important things to their aging well is their social connectedness and their spiritual connection. And you can't separate spiritual interconnectedness with you can't separate it from the social, and you can't separate it from the physical either. And I think that's been our emphasis on this podcast, is to really underscore the role of SPIES in longevity, and not just in living longer, but living with vitality and living with, purpose, big P purpose. I don't know why I want to keep saying big C purpose today, but the big P purpose.
Man, that kind of reminds me. I had just attended a men's conference through our church, and the theme this year, I still have the wristband. It's spirit, soul, and body. And as we were talking about this in our men's conference, and it's showing how everything is intertwined and interconnected, and it starts off at the spirit, and then it goes into our soul, which is our mind and our emotion. Then it goes out into the body, and I'm like, dude, this is awesome. I don't know if anyone through my church listens to the Aging Well podcast, but this is kind of everything that we've been talking about through the Aging Well podcast, and everything that our guests are saying. And I just feel like I'm excited for this season. This is going to be so good. And as we were going through those different dimensions, which of these dimensions do you feel is most neglected in the mainstream longevity conversation?
100% spiritual.
Yeah.
I think that is, and again, we're not talking religious belief, faith systems, or any of that. We're talking about the idea of how we define self. We can be selfish where we're just focused in on ourselves. That's the much more
Mm,
physical, biohacking, longevity approach. Or we can focus more on this transcendent self, the selfless self, focused on others, focusing on purpose, focusing in on our role in society. And what's the point in aging for 120, living for 120 years if you're not having a positive impact on the universe? And I think we miss out on that. Why? Who cares if I live to be 120 if I don't do anything other than spend $2 million a year trying to outlive everybody else? That to me is a completely fruitless life. I would rather live one more year giving this podcast and educating people on how to transform themselves than to live 50 more years and do nothing but, maybe play golf in my retirement or, just make a lot of money and, travel for my own self-pleasure. Not that those things are wrong,
no.
but that we have to have that spiritual approach, that there's something greater than self. There's a purpose to why we are here and why we want to age and why we want more years in our life. Let's pause for a moment to thank the affiliate partners who help support the Aging Well podcast. We're not sponsored and no company pays for airtime here. But when you use our affiliate links, it helps us keep producing thoughtful, evidence-informed content. One brand I genuinely trust is Aura Wellness, especially their Glutarol, Glutarol Plus, and copper peptide formulations. I've spent time vetting their science, their ingredient quality, and their transparency, and I personally use these products in my own wellness routine. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and exploring tools that may help you feel and function better, check out Aura Wellness in the show notes.
Dr. Armstrong, by you mentioning that, it reminds me of an episode that we pre-recorded, and our viewers can listen to it on episode 8. It's coming out. It's an interview we did with um, Bill Goodwin, and he brought up a Mark Twain quote. And the Mark Twain quote was, the two most important days of your life is A, the day you were born, and B, the day you figured out what you were born for, like what that purpose was. And figuring out what our purpose is in life and what we were born to do, what we were created to do. I mean, once we figure that out, it's almost like get out of our way. We're able to move forward and impact the world in the way. Do you know what I'm saying? Like impact
Yeah,
it in such a positive way, using our skill set, using our experience, using our overall purpose. It's that was the most powerful quote I had heard in a really long time. So, Dr. Armstrong, do you think you could remind our listeners what our 6 pillars of aging well are and why these should be the foundation, not a supplement or drugs?
well, I don't know if I just mentioned those recently. I mean, kind of already a blur in this episode, but I think, we talk about the 6 pillars being, exercise and physical activity, the importance of those, eating a healthy diet, maintaining healthy body composition. We've historically said as number 4, smoking, or not smoking rather, is a pillar, and then sleep hygiene, and finally, purposeful social connection. And each of those, I think, are so fundamental. I'll start with smoking because that seems a little bit maybe obvious, but also, well, what about all these other things? People can say don't take drugs or don't drink or do. All of those things kind of fall under that same umbrella. But I think, when you look at cigarette smoking, there's so flat out so many bad health things. It's going to shorten your life. And I know some people say, well, my great-grandmother, she lived to be 105 and she smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day. She was just damn lucky. She might have lived to be 120 if she didn't smoke. But the point there is, avoiding the habits and consumption of things that are going to be detrimental to our overall health and our longevity. And that's probably, I would put that kind of at the lowest of the list of the 6 pillars. Exercise has historically been our top pillar because we are exercise scientists. I'm an exercise physiologist. I got to say, exercise is important, right? And we know that physical activity, movement, all those things, and not just physical exercise from the standpoint of going to the gym or doing those types of things, because most of the people in the blue zones are not going to Gold's Gym 6 days a week or any of that kind of stuff. They're just active. They're using their bodies. They're doing activity that is a little bit beyond what is the norm or the average. They're optimizing their movement. And then when we look at diet, really, there's no absolutes when it comes to diet. Everybody is going to benefit more or less from the different diets. And I'm not going to get on here and ever say that, you should absolutely do this particular diet because that might work for me. It might work for you, might not work for you, might not work for somebody else. But finding what works best for you, but underscoring that no matter what our diet is, whether we're Mediterranean or Nordic diet or, carnivore diet or vegetarian, the most important thing is where our food is coming from and our connection with that food. Are we eating food that is most close to nature, coming from healthy soil, being sustainably grown, local, all those types of things, and having variety in those foods to where we're getting the nutrients that our body needs. Because if we're getting the nutrients that our body needs, we don't need supplements, we don't need drugs to fix anything because our body is already capable of fixing ourselves. And we've had numerous guests on this podcast that have talked about the brain-gut connection and how important it is for our gut biome to be sustained and functioning, because that's where we're getting serotonin and dopamine and things like that being released into the body. And so diet, just eating healthy diet, is so much more important than knowing which supplements to take or having this whole protocol of supplements that you take in order to be healthy. And then we get into maintaining healthy body composition. And I think our society has gone to 2 extremes when it comes to body composition. We have this excessive acceptance of excessive body fat. That you should just accept me the way I am, I'm comfortable, and everything else. And we shouldn't judge people on how they look based on their body composition, but we should understand that body composition is very closely tied to one's health. And on the other extreme, people that are focused on 6-pack abs and excessively lean percent body fats are not healthy either. And, taking drugs or medications or supplements in order to either have to counteract the effects of excessive body composition or to get to an excessively low body composition is not healthy. That's not aging well. And so when we talk about a healthy body composition, we're talking about a modest amount of body fat, that can keep the body protected, keep it healthy, meaning that you're getting adequate nourishment, but not too much nourishment or too little nourishment. We're getting the right foods. And so eating a healthy diet that's going to help us to maintain a healthy body composition that sustains our immune system, limits inflammation, and helps our bodies to function as optimally as possible. And then we get into, we talked about not smoking. The next pillar would be sleep hygiene. And we have talked countless times on this podcast just about how important sleep is and the risks of all forms of dementia by not sleeping enough, or all the other processes that break down because we don't have time to sleep thoroughly, get good restorative sleep to be able to restore muscle proteins, to allow for cortisol levels to normalize so that we're not in these extremes of cortisol, or we're not seeing elevated cortisol from stress that tends to begin to break down the body. So we can supplement our way into countering bad sleep, or we can wake up in the morning and be totally reliant on caffeine or stimulants in order to get through the day. But none of that is really helping us when it comes to aging well. And so the foundation is having good sleep hygiene, getting to bed at a normal time, at a regular time, getting up at the same time, going to bed at the same time every day and night, or close to it, without, ruining your relationships. But, doing things at night, turning the computer off, maybe reading, doing something more purposeful for meditation or mindfulness, turn down the lights, get to bed early, use your bed for the two things it's intended for, sleep and sex, and nothing else. Don't take your computer into bed to do work or any of those types of things. Having good sleep hygiene is going to do so much for our recoverability. And I don't think we can exercise effectively if we're not sleeping well. And we're not going to get the benefits of our exercise if we're not getting restorative sleep. And so sleep for me has really elevated above exercise in importance. That if we're not getting adequate sleep, we're not going to recover well. We're not going to be able to age well. And then finally, there's nothing that drugs or supplements can do to counteract poor social relationships. We have to be focused on doing things that are going to connect us with others, build that social dimension, and that social dimension feeds back into the physical, the spiritual, the intellectual, and emotional, and they all feed together. And again, supplements and drugs are not going to replace any of those areas of the 6 pillars of aging well.
I mean, it's so cool hearing you share this, and just seeing how much like this platform with all of our social connections of interviewing individuals and stuff, and it's so cool knowing where you were at to where you're at now, and having and seeing your perception and your mindset, how it's continuously growing and continuously changing. Prime example is when I had asked that question is you mentioned, I'm not going to tell someone what diet to choose. Although I know personally you're a huge believer of the Mediterranean and the Nordic diet, and we've done a few episodes on that, recognizing like, hey, that may not work for everyone, and then moving forward. And the overall thing is just get nutrient dense, rich foods that's the most healthy and you're not pushing anything, you're just covering the overall process, and what works for one individual may not work for another. And it's just so cool seeing how much your brain has just expanded. And it's almost like you're taking the knowledge that you just had and you're adding this extra wisdom to it. And I just can't tell you how cool it is watching you grow and listening to you and being a part of this podcast. So I just wanted to say thank you for that amazing answer. Really, it
Well,
was.
when you say extra wisdom, that implies that there was wisdom to begin with. And I would argue I'm just starting to scratch the surface of having any kind of wisdom. And, you talk to people around me, I'm growing, I'm learning in this whole process. And, I hope that nobody listening to this podcast thinks that, will ever call me an expert or you an expert in terms of the of aging well, because I don't believe in experts. I believe that the more we learn, the more ignorant we become, because we recognize how little we know. And
Yeah.
this is a process. This aging well is a process. It's not something that I stand here as a expert on aging. I am not an aging expert. I am just somebody who's trying to age well, just like everybody else.
I just think it's really cool that it's like, episodes that we were really passionate about in the past. Hey, our mindsets may have changed as we dive into the newest literature that's out there, or the newest case studies or whatever. And it shows that, those who dare to teach must never cease to learn. And you're just constantly learning, constantly growing, and you're where you were and where I was at in the beginning. It's look how far in advance we've come, and it's just like we're just ever growing, and we want people to grow with us. And I just, if someone had listened to a past episode and is like, wait a second, you guys said this in the past, and it's like, well, at the time, yeah, that may have been true, correct, and accurate, but maybe our mindset have changed. Maybe we've came to a realization, and I think that's also part of aging well, is moving forward from where you once were. And I think part of that is really our connection and growing and learning from other individuals. So let me ask you this, Dr. Armstrong. Why is purposeful social connection so central to aging well, and even more so than some biological interventions?
Well, I think some of it we maybe just don't know exactly. I mean, from a physiological standpoint, has anybody really studied the exact physiological benefits of social connection and why people who are more socially connected have, better longevity? But I think it really comes down to the fact that we just having supportive individuals around you, having people who are promoting your growth and helping you to change for the better leads to a better existence and a purpose for living. And so the more purpose we have and the more support we have in our lives, the better our overall body function is going to be. We know that social connection has so many benefits when it comes to healing disease and to keeping us well, that if we're not connected, we're just not having any real purpose in living, right? And
Ooh, that's
so
good.
what's the point in, you take a biological intervention in order to live longer, but you can't sustain a marriage or a relationship because of your protocol or, the things that you're doing in your life to try and live longer. What's the real point in all that? And so whether it helps us to live longer or not, our purpose on this earth is not about how long we live. It's about the impact that we make. And, I believe wholeheartedly in this notion of us being kind of going beyond the biological evolution of man to the spiritual evolution of man. And I think we are, and, for more details on this, I suggest somebody just watch we have a spiritual problem podcast, but I'm a wholehearted believer in that we are here for the purpose of evolving spiritually as well as kind of physically and growing to something greater than what we are now as both a species, but also as an individual. And so just simply living longer years is meaningless unless it comes with some purpose and comes with some level of impact on the universe.
Now, you've used the term transformational aging, and you did kind of just answer it, but in the terminology of transformational aging, what do you mean by that? And how is that different from our traditional approach to longevity?
I think traditionally we have been transactional, where it's like, maybe it's about, you do the exercise to grow your muscles, to get stronger, for more of like, you look at like the people that are tracking their biological markers, and that is the marker of aging well for that individual. And yeah, okay, those are important. It's if I can lower my cholesterol, or if I can, lower my C-reactive protein, or I can elevate my testosterone, or I can do this or that in order to facilitate my body's capability of living longer. That's great, but it's only part of the problem, part of the issue. The idea of transformational aging brings into all this the idea of purpose in, growing within the SPIES model in order not only to serve ourselves, but more so to serve others. And I think that's where this notion of transformational aging is really important. And I think that's where I hope we become the Aging Well podcast, is because we're looking beyond the transactional into the more transformational, that we're getting people to change who they are and finding reason for every stage of their life. You go through that first age, second age, third age, and then ultimately, hopefully, by the time we get to a fourth age, that fourth age is going to be short, and we're going to be able to be on our deathbed, if we are on a deathbed, if it's not this sudden quick death at the end of our third age, but we have that opportunity to reflect back and have no regrets in life, and to have the opportunity to be able to say goodbye to family, and they're like, it's okay, you've lived a full and wonderful life, and we're okay with saying goodbye at this point. And I think that is really what it's kind of all about.
So would you say, as an individual goes through those four stages of life, do you think that focusing on spiritual and social health can actually extend health spans as much as, or if not even more, some of the high tech interventions that we're hearing about?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, if you look at, so another one of the guests that'll be coming up in one of the early episodes of this season, talking about Viktor Frankl's, I'm drawing a blank on the title of his book now, not The Meaning of Life, because that's the Monty Python. My son and I were just talking about that movie last night. But, looking at, if you looked at the people who lived through the Holocaust and World War II, those who had purpose could have undergone the most abusive, horrible things in their lives, but they had purpose and they were able to sustain through that, and they lived longer than the people who were able to garner some favor and a little bit more protected in the concentration camps, actually did not survive that period of time as well. And it's having that purpose and the will to live, the vitality to live, the need to live, that gives us better health span. And I think health span is a good step beyond longevity, but I think we have to go even a step further from health span and talk about well span as we look at aging well. And people who have a spiritual and good social health are naturally going to be able to extend that well span much more significantly than even people who take care of themselves, eat right, and get the right medical attention when they need it. There's that next step beyond healthy living. We can live long, but we can be sick for a long period of time, or we can live long with a good health span. But what's more important? It's living with that well span.
Dr. Armstrong, how do you envision people shifting from a consumer mindset around aging, buying the next hack, to a formation mindset, building a meaningful life?
That's a good question. Maybe it's, more people tune into this podcast and that helps shift that mindset. In some situations, I think for many people, that mindset is going to have to shift based on circumstances. You mentioned Bill Goodwin was coming up in episode 8. The big turning point for him was a near-death experience when he was 28. Not everybody's going to experience that. Some people have to in order to shift that mindset. Others, it just might be the final realization that we've been duped by so many of these grifters that are selling us crap on the internet. And, I'm tired of spending hundreds of dollars a month on supplements that don't do anything to turn the dial, and realizing that, there's more important things in my life rather than spending hundreds of dollars. If I had billions of dollars to spend, I'm not going to be spending $2 million a year on myself trying to age well or age long. I'm going to be spending that $2 million in a way that is going to empower my children to have a better life. So focus on their education and their futures, focusing in on improving my community so that other people can benefit from what I have found to be productive, focusing in on educating people. Having meaning in life is so much more important than focusing in on ourselves. And so for people to shift from that consumer mindset, that self-centered mindset, to a more formation mindset, which is a more transformational, more selfless mindset, it's really going to depend on the individual. But I think, if you look at our society right now, we are under such great tension that I'm optimistic that there's going to be this shift. And I think it's the tension in society that is going to push it. It's like, before I became an exercise physiologist, I studied geology. And so understanding that tension on a fault line is just before an earthquake kind of occurs, because the tension is released in the process of that earthquake, and there's great deformation to the earth, but it's changed. I mean, we wouldn't have the Rocky Mountains and all these beautiful landscape structures across the globe if it weren't for tension in the plates of the earth moving over time, and that tension building and building and building and then being released. And then, the erosive processes, shape the earth even further. It's the same thing in our own personal lives, whether it's spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social. From exercise physiology that we talk about the principle of overload, that a body system cannot adapt unless it is stressed to a level greater than that to which it is accustomed. Well, the same thing occurs in life. If we don't have tension and stress in our lives, there's no impetus for change. There's no growth. And so, muscle grows because it's stressed beyond what it's accustomed to. Same with our spiritual selves, our physical selves, our intellectual, our emotional, and social selves. The tensions in life help us to grow and to move forward. And so it's probably just going to take the total collapse of this whole supplement industry and the recognition that we are being duped by more than just the pharmacology, the big pharma and everything else. We're being duped by a bunch of people selling us a bunch of crappy supplements, and the realizing that, we had the power in our own hands to change and to be healthy. It's picking up on those 6 pillars and what can I do personally to change my life to make it more meaningful for other individuals. And so I don't know if I've answered your question. The way I envision it, I think, is people are just going to need that kick in the ass to finally wake up and realize that the way we're living is not the way that is going to help us to age well.
You definitely answered it. So let me ask you this. If someone is either listening or watching, they're tuning in somehow to this podcast episode, and that same someone feels overwhelmed by all the noise in the longevity space, where should they start?
The Aging Well podcast.
Oh, yeah.
No, I think, where they should start is by turning down the noise. Get off of YouTube and the internet. Stop constantly scrolling for the next biohack and focus on, being more mindful. Focus on, mindful practices, whether it's journaling, yoga, meditation, prayer, whatever works for you as an individual. Get yourself moving. Start focusing in on just what can I change in my diet now without, having to worry about, well, how many nutrients or what's in this or where did this come from? Just making the changes of, okay, I know this is unhealthy, so I'm going to stop eating it. So just turn down the noise, because if your stereo is too loud, putting your hands over your ears isn't going to fix it. You go over, you turn the dial down a little bit, right?
Right.
And so the idea is to lower the noise in the longevity space and focus in on what are the most important things. What can we prioritize to improve our life right now in this moment? And focus on yourself, focus on those things. Don't focus on all the noise and the BS that's out there. Probably easier said than done.
Yeah. Would you say focus on the problem and not coming up with an easy solution, but more of a long-term solution? So instead of like turning down the radio, maybe just turning off the radio and allowing yourself to think and process, not getting onto YouTube and do the death scroll brain rot, but actually feeding your brain with information that's good and knowledgeable and things that can advance you in life. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yeah, but again, to get there, it's going to be baby steps. So it might be turning it down a little bit. And then in that space that you've created, start, maybe reading a couple good books. I mean, we've had numerous authors on this. If you just took the time to read, one in every 5 authors that we have on this podcast, read some of the materials that they share, you're going to find yourself growing in that longevity space better than if you just are scrolling on YouTube or whatever. But as you create space, I talk all the time in my classes about opportunity costs, that you have a certain amount of space. So if we're talking like aging well as a space, and you have the longevity influence in all of that and all of the noise that we're getting from that, all that noise is taking away from you doing what is most productive and most helpful. So turn down some of that noise, fill that void with productive activities, things that are going to baby step you toward better health, better wealth span, and then just keep doing that. Just keep creating more space. And as we shift how we're using our opportunities from the noise to kind of a quiet, more purposeful, mindful approach to aging well, then step by step we're going to get there. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So how can we balance being open to new science and innovations without getting distracted by all the hype?
Wow, that's a tough one. I think it's just what I was talking about is, just not leaning into the hype as much as you get information, rather than just, you open up a YouTube video and somebody is telling you about some certain supplement. And so the next video that's going to come up is somebody else supporting that hype. And it just, you get more and more. So the more you're scrolling, the more you're getting fed the information that the algorithm thinks you want.
Right.
And so you're not getting necessarily the most honest information. So you get a little bit of information. So, okay, wow, this supplement sounds interesting. I was watching on the podcast that Dr. Armstrong had Nan Patel on, and he was talking about glutathione or, copper peptide. Or, we had Leslie Kenny on last season who talking about spermidine. So, okay, this sounds interesting. Rather than going and listening to more people supporting what I just said, go into some literature, find articles that you're capable of understanding that can help you to really tease out, is what he's talking about something real? We need to improve our science literacy a bit in this country. Right. And rather than getting our information from a bunch of influencers, take the influence of that influencer, but let that lead into a more critical evaluation of what is being presented, and is this factual or is it just hype?
So what would you say to someone who's spending a lot of money on supplements, but then neglecting the basic wellness of habits?
Get your head out of your ass. It's why are you spending so the reason for the whole purpose of supplement is to supplement our diet. And so if you have to supplement so much, what are you not doing that's requiring those supplements? You're either buying into the hype, or you are not focused on the basic habits that are going to neglect that. And I love going back to Dr. Patel's seesaw analogy, and because he's one, and he's to be open and transparent on this podcast. We are an affiliate of Oral Wellness, and it's probably the one product that we see our viewers and listeners buying the most. And I love the gluteral product. I use it every day. I took his advice. I'm buying one bottle a month, and rather than doing 2 doses a day, I only do 4 sprays in the morning, because it's not a cheap supplement, but it tops off things. And his whole thing is you can improve your glutathione stores by eating well, getting good sleep, exercising, doing all the things that we should be doing. And Leslie Kenny said the same thing with her spermidine product, that Primadine, as she calls it. You want to get your lifestyle in as much balance as possible through these proper wellness habits. And then if your body is still, for whatever reasons, out of sync with where it should be, then these other supplements and things can come in as a supplement to be able to support that overall well functioning. And so that's the approach that I would recommend to people who are spending a lot of money on supplements. Focus in on what can I do to fix my life, get in the right balance, and then what's the necessary supplements that I'm maybe not getting from the foods that I'm able to eat or that I can afford. Because again, if you're spending a lot on supplements, that money could go toward healthier food, right? And so you don't want to spend a lot of money on supplementation. You want to spend your money where it's going to give you the most bang for your buck. And the best bang for your buck is going to be correcting the problems in the first place, and then using the supplements to just kind of be the icing on the cake. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and I like your seesaw analogy, because it's like, are you taking a supplement because you have done the research and you believe it's good, or are you doing it in a way that someone else on a large platform told you? And so you're like, well, I trust their word. And then you start taking it, not realizing that you also need additional supplements in order for that to work. Or by you taking that supplement, it counterbalances your other body parts, like your other
Yeah.
nutrients that you know what I mean? It negates it all. And so if you hear something, take Dr. Armstrong's advice, do research on it, look into it. Don't just listen to the pros, look into the cons. Is the hype living up to where where it actually is? So yeah. Dr. Armstrong, what do you hope changes in the longevity conversation in the next 5 to 10 years?
I hope that we start talking more about transformative aging. I hope we're the trendsetters in that we're talking about the SPIES model, that we're talking about, the 6 pillars, and not talking about biohacking from a standpoint of, trying to shortcut our way to living longer. That we are looking more at the quality of life as opposed to the longevity of life. And that's my biggest hope for the longevity conversation, is that we're on a better path to that spiritual evolution, And along with that, better physical, intellectual, emotional, and social well-being, because we're focused on the right things, not just the hacks.
So if we get this right, if we refocus on what really matters, what could aging well look like for individuals and communities?
Well, I think, in another conversation will be coming up in a future episode and that we've already recorded, but Tim Christopherson and I, we just recorded the conversation, and you know how I favor the tragedy of the commons, right? And it's something that impacted me as an undergraduate in an assignment that I had, and I've carried that through. It has shaped my worldview for probably pushing 45 years now. And in my pathophysiology and exercise class, I have the students read the article. It's a 1968 article, and it's by Garrett Hardin. I recommend everybody read it and absorb it. But I've long talked about the tragedy of the commons and the role that, and if we look at it from like a longevity standpoint, healthcare standpoint, think of the commons as a pasture that is shared by multiple different ranchers or farmers that, have an animal grazing on it. And if they all put one animal out on that field and allow the field to naturally kind of restore itself based after the grazing, then everything is sustainable. The field continues to be productive. The farmers get milk from their cattle and so on. But invariably, human nature is that, well, if I just put one more cow on the land, it's not going to have a huge impact. And that impact is going to be shared by the many. And so nobody's going to really feel it that much. But then every other farmer starts doing the same thing. Suddenly now that field is overgrazed and it can't sustain and it depletes itself. So in my physical activity or the pathophysiology and exercise class, I have them talk about that article relative to like healthcare versus universal health. And when we look at healthcare, it's just unmanageable in this country. I mean, we are becoming sicker and sicker and sicker. It's costing more and more money. And as you know, in Oregon, we have changed the Constitution where universal healthcare is labeled as a fundamental human right. And yet there's no discussion about how much is that going to cost us? And if we continue to be unhealthy, the cost of healthcare is just going to continue to skyrocket. And then you're going to have to get to a point where you have to ration that care. And I know our friends in Canada see this with their bit more of a socialized medicine. And not that I think that people should not have access to healthcare, but what we have to realize is that the sicker we become, the resources are only available to the sickest. And if the sick aren't even getting the care that they need, but the person who is just on the fringe of getting sick and just through a little bit of intervention might be able to correct their health, that individual doesn't get the care that they need because they don't have access to health care, then they're going to get worse and they're going to get more sick, and it's just going to add to the cost of aging well. And so if we refocus in on, okay, this individual has this particular need, we're going to focus on that, but we also have to focus in on, we talk about the why versus the why not somebody should be wanting to age well. The why not is up to our community. If we have obstacles to people being able to live longer, healthier, more vital lives, then what can we do as a society to open up that access rather than keeping it closed and then just dealing with, having to fix the problem, putting a Band-Aid on the ruptured blood vessel rather than trying to prevent them from getting the injury in the first place. And so our communities, we can look at, okay, well, what do we need to make people well? We need safe outdoor environments for people to exercise. We need better education. We need, better access to good nutrition. All these things are things that we can do if we are thinking about being more transformational, being more transformative selves as opposed to just focusing in on ourselves. If I live the lifestyle that I want to live, good or bad, and I get sick, then I just go to the hospital. The hospital's going to take care of me. That doesn't help society, and it doesn't help our communities age well. But if we start thinking about, okay, what can I do personally to be less of a drain on the healthcare systems, to live well, to contribute to my communities, then I'm growing part of that community. And in that conversation with Tim, he mentioned what I'd never thought of before, and it's something I'm going to continue to now latch on to and use this terminology. And we talk about the tragedy of the commons. Well, we can begin to approach the glory of the commons. And the glory of that commons means that now we have this opportunity to share in all the benefits of aging well by doing our part to contribute back into that commons as opposed to taking from the commons. And I think that's what we have to do in order for us to have a society of people who are aging well. We have to begin to address the things that are preventing people from aging well.
Final thought. What's one simple but totally meaningful shift someone could make today towards transformational aging?
I think probably the most simple, meaningful shift that somebody could do is just take 15 minutes, even 10 minutes a day, and just reflect on themselves. Take those 5 components of SPIES and then look at what can I do differently today that will fuel my growth spiritually, that will fuel my growth physically, that will help me to grow mentally and improve my intellectual well-being. What can I alter in my emotional approach or lack thereof to become more emotionally balanced and well? And then finally, what can I do for others socially to grow society, to be more selfless and less self-centered? I think that's probably the most important thing that we can do, because from that brief moment of reflection, we can come up with 1 to 5 baby steps to take today that will help us to be our best today and then be better tomorrow.
So in conclusion, I would say that as we walk through our 4 stages of life and we have that thirst for longevity, that's a great thirst to have. But it won't always be quenched if we don't prioritize transformational aging. Don't be stagnant. Continue to grow. Continue to question things. Don't just drink the Kool-Aid. Do your research. Learn, grow, get involved. Find your purpose in life. Influence others in a positive way, an impactful way, a way that you are growing spiritually, emotionally, physically, all around. And if you do these things and you take those steps, not just recognizing that there's a problem and putting a Band-Aid over it or sweeping it under the rug, but slowly take the baby steps needed in order to come up with a solution for that problem, you do all these things, and I promise you will age well.
And if this has resonated with you and you want to be transformative and help others transform, then share this podcast, like it, subscribe, support it by supporting our affiliates. And we thank you for joining us in the start of this season 5. And I'm really excited for what it has to bring to not only you and me, but to our listeners and our viewers as well. So keep aging well. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Aging Well podcast. Please like, subscribe or follow, and share this episode with a friend. And be sure to visit the affiliate links in the description below. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep aging well.